A few hours ago. As soon as the plane landed, Leah felt the excitement she had been hiding for so long. She hadn't been home for 4 years, and now the anticipation of getting off the plane was unbearable for her. Ahead was the winter holidays, a family celebration, the wedding of her younger sister Ellie and her fiancé Oliver. As Leah stepped outside, the frosty air stung her cheeks and tiny snowflakes fell into her hair. She paused for a moment, reaching out to catch the fluffy flakes, which immediately melted in her palm. These moments of returning home brought back warm memories. Leah headed to the car rental office. She refused to let her family help, deciding that she could handle it herself. Her father had recently suffered a stroke, and although his health was gradually improving, Leah didn't want him to worry about meeting her at the airport. Her heart skipped a beat with anticipation. She was going to see all her loved ones, her mother, father, sister Ellie and, of course, her little nephew Thomas, who was born in her absence. After signing the necessary papers to rent a car, Leah set off. The snowfall intensified, and soon the road turned into an endless white canvas. She drove onto a quiet country road to avoid heavy traffic, but soon realized that this road could be more dangerous than it seemed. On the road. After driving a few kilometers, Leah noticed that her car was skidding slightly. She tried to slow down, but it was too late, the wheels lost traction, and the car ended up on the snowy side of the road. Leah hit her head on the steering wheel, feeling a sharp pain. There was a noise in her head, and she froze, trying to come to her senses. Drops of blood appeared on her hands, and she suddenly felt how the loneliness of this deserted road began to press on her shoulders. Leah spent a few moments in confusion, hoping to see at least one headlight in the distance. She tried to dial her sister's number, but the connection was unstable. She nervously closed her eyes, trying to collect her thoughts and figure out how to get out. And then headlights flashed from behind. Someone was clearly approaching. It was a tall man who slowly approached the car and knocked on the glass. Leah carefully lowered the glass, slightly surprised by the unexpected meeting. "Can I help you?" the stranger asked reservedly. Leah, slightly limping, got out of the car to explain her situation. But she fainted from the shock she had experienced. As Mark carefully carried the stranger to his jeep, he felt his pulse quicken. Her face seemed vaguely familiar to him, but the dim light of the road made it difficult to discern details. He carefully placed her in the back seat, where Rex sat next to her, whining as if he sensed unrest in the air. Mark examined the scene of the accident, checking for any evidence that might shed light on the victim's identity. In her bag, he found her passport and a few personal belongings, but her driver's license and phone were missing, perhaps thrown away in the collision. Rex barked softly, as if reminding him of the importance of time. Mark knew that he needed to get back to the house in the woods as soon as possible and administer first aid. The house was not that far away, and he knew the local woodland trails well. When they arrived, Mark carried the stranger into the house and laid her on the couch in front of the fireplace, covering her with a blanket and checking her for serious injuries. Fortunately, the injuries were not as serious as he had feared. The girl slowly began to come to, her eyes slowly opening until she finally focused on his face. "You're safe," Mark said quietly, sitting down next to her. "Your name is?" He glanced at her passport, which he still held in his hands. "Leah?" She nodded, her gaze slowly focusing on him. "Where am I? What happened?" Her voice was weak, but there was curiosity and slight confusion in it. "You were in an accident," he explained, "but it's over now. I found you on the road, and you're safe now." Leah, still a little shaken, smiled a weak, grateful smile. "Thank you. How did you find me?" She glanced at Rex, who was sitting next to her, as if guarding her peace. Mark looked at Rex too and smiled. "Rex found you. He has a special sense of when to be near." Leah laughed softly, and the tension eased a little. They talked for a while longer, until they felt the fatigue take its toll. Mark left her to rest on the couch, and he settled into the chair next to her, so that he would be there if she needed anything. The night passed quietly. The next morning, Mark slowly came to, feeling a slight pain in his head and incredible fatigue. He did not immediately understand where he was, but soon realized that he was sitting in a chair. The last thing he remembered was helping a girl at the scene of an accident. When Mark opened his eyes, the light pouring from the window blinded him, and he had to close his eyes. Finally, his eyes adjusted, and he saw Leah sitting on the couch next to him. She looked at him carefully, smiling slightly. "I'm glad you finally woke up," she said quietly, holding a glass of water and a pack of painkillers. Mark tried to get up, but the headache was getting worse, and he instinctively put his hand on his head. Now, take your time," Leah said, pushing the glass towards him. "You need to take these pills, they will help with the pain." Mark took the water and pills, feeling relieved by her worry. As his headache eased, he noticed her expressive dark eyes that seemed to stare straight into his soul. "Thank you for taking care of me," he said, trying to regain his composure. "What happened after the accident?" "You saved me and brought me home. Then fatigue seemed to get the better of you and you passed out in your chair," Leah explained, her eyes grateful. "I wanted to call my family, but there's barely any reception here." Mark nodded, getting up from his chair and checking that his phone was still off. The snowstorm was still raging outside, and the chances of getting out of here today seemed slim. "We could try to get a signal by the window on the second floor," Mark suggested, and Leah nodded, handing him her phone. They walked up to the second floor together and tried to get a signal by the window. Finally, the message was transmitted, and Leah sighed in relief. "I hope they get my message," she said quietly, sitting back down on the bed. "I was supposed to be home a couple hours ago. They're probably going crazy with worry." Mark looked at her and said hesitantly, "I'm sorry I kept you here. It's safer here with this weather. But I promise I'll take you home as soon as the storm passes." Leah looked at him, her eyes full of trust. "You know, maybe this is for the best," she admitted. "We're safe, and I have a chance to get to know you better." Mark fell silent, their eyes meeting again, and in that moment all the troubles of the outside world seemed to disappear. Leah stood up and slowly walked around the first floor of the house, taking in her surroundings. The house was cozy and luxurious at the same time. The kitchen had modern stainless steel appliances, a large marble island in the middle, and a wooden dining table against the wall, creating a harmony of modernity and rustic coziness. She glanced into the living room, where a fireplace was burning, its light softly, warmly illuminating the entire space. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her and turned around, almost colliding with Mark. He was standing so close that Leah caught a whiff of his perfume, something soft and floral. Leah blushed and took a step back, noticing his intense gaze. "Does it still hurt?" she asked, smiling slightly, probably noticing that he was looking at her. "A little," he replied, scratching the back of his head and avoiding her gaze. "But I'm used to it. And by the way, you made amazing cocoa." She smiled slightly and turned away, but Mark noticed the blush that had appeared on her cheeks. "I'd like to buy you dinner, but I'm afraid it wouldn't be anything nice," he said, smiling. "Maybe toast and cheese." "That sounds good for someone who spent half the day in the snow," she played along, smiling. Mark walked into the kitchen, got out the bread and cheese, and then turned to Leah, who had already settled in at the kitchen island. They exchanged glances, and he smiled as if she was there every day. As he made the toast, they chatted about various things: snowstorms, her family, and, of course, her job at the bakery. Leah was so engrossed in her cakes and pastries that Mark could practically imagine the aroma of freshly baked goods wafting from her cafe. "So you only came home for your sister's wedding?" he asked, watching her reaction with interest. "Yes, and to see your family again, of course," Leah replied, her gaze clouding over as if she were remembering something distant and beloved. "Besides, I've missed them a lot." Mark looked at her, and for a moment it seemed as if there was something special between them that hadn't been there since he first met her gaze. When the toast was ready, he served the plate with the treat, and they both settled into the kitchen. He saw her slowly taking a bite of her toast, enjoying the moment, and couldn't help but ask, So, what are you going to do tomorrow if the snowstorm doesn't stop? Leah looked at him with a mysterious smile in her eyes. Well, I guess you won't get rid of me that quickly. Mark chuckled, shrugging. That doesn't seem like such a bad prospect. They exchanged glances, and Leah suddenly felt her cheeks heat up. She quickly looked away, trying to focus on her toast, but her mind kept returning to the way his gaze seemed to pierce her. Mark noticed her confusion and chuckled, leaning back, settling himself comfortably into the kitchen chair. A small smile flickered across his lips, but he didn't seem to want to embarrass her further. So you like baking, he began, breaking off the remaining piece of toast. What if you had the opportunity to open your own bakery anywhere? Would you give up everything and move away again? Leah froze, not expecting the question. She looked at him, paused for a moment, and nodded. I guess so, she answered quietly. London has given me so many opportunities, but I still miss home, my family, this whole place. Maybe I'm just afraid of getting too attached, or maybe I'm afraid of leaving again. Her words hung in the air, and Mark sensed something hidden in them. He wanted to get to know her better, to understand what memories kept her here, in this old but so cozy house. Deep down, he knew this feeling, an overwhelming desire to return to your roots, even when new opportunities seem to open up a whole new world. I know this feeling, he said quietly, looking at her. Sometimes life throws us all over the world, and then brings us back home at the most unexpected times. Leah nodded, their eyes met, and for a moment they both knew that someone finally understood them. This moment of connection was almost magical, simple, and honest. At one point, they both felt as if they were alone on the planet, covered in a blanket of snow. Well, what about you? Leah broke the silence, tilting her head slightly and looking at him with interest. Did you just come here to see the house, or are you hiding something else? Mark grinned, clearly about to answer, but at that moment, Rex, his faithful dog, burst into the kitchen, wagging his tail loudly and sniffing the remains of food on the table. He approached his owner, rubbed his muzzle against her hand and whined good-naturedly. Leah leaned down with a smile and petted the dog, holding him close. She felt all her worries leave her. It was as if Rex had brought with him a feeling of simple happiness and comfort. Okay, Mark said, watching her and grinning again. How about a little party, since we're stuck here for a while? I have some wine, a few movies, and decent taste in music, if you ask me. Leah snorted, smirking. Okay, you've convinced me. But know that I'm a terrible film critic, and if a movie is bad, you'll hear about it right away. Mark laughed, standing up and heading to the cabinet, where he pulled out a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Consider this a fair warning, he replied, pouring the wine. They moved into the living room, where the fireplace was still crackling comfortably, creating an atmosphere of calm and coziness. Mark turned on some quiet, relaxing music on the record player, which seemed to weave into the warm light of the fire. Leah settled down next to him, sipping her wine and feeling the fatigue of the day slowly evaporate. Leah relaxed, feeling at ease with Mark in a way she hadn't felt with anyone in a long time. The cozy atmosphere, the soft light of the fireplace, and the soft music created a feeling of complete peace and privacy. They talked about many things, about her life in London, about his business, about places they wanted to visit. Time seemed to slow down. Leah laughed as Mark, imitating different voices, comically recounted events from his life, made fun of himself and even performed parodies of popular songs. At some point, they both laughed so infectiously that even Rex began to wag his tail, encouraging them. You know, Leah said, finally wiping away tears of laughter, I thought I came here just to wait out the snowfall. But now I feel like, I don't even know how to say it, home or something. Mark froze for a moment, his face becoming a little more serious. He kept his eyes on her, and it seemed as if some invisible connection had formed between them, which grew stronger with each passing moment. You know, Leah, I haven't felt so light in a long time. Ever since you showed up here, this whole place has come alive. They looked into each other's eyes. In the silence, filled only with the crackling fire, a tension arose that was no longer possible to ignore. It seemed that the atmosphere itself, like their common shelter from the stormy world, gently pushed them towards each other. Mark took a step forward, not taking his eyes off her. He gently ran his hand over her cheek, and then leaned down and carefully touched her lips with his. The kiss was soft, as if weightless, but in this touch Leah felt all the strength that had accumulated between them over these hours spent together. She responded to his kiss, putting all her feelings into it, allowing herself to forget about everything except this moment. They were in no hurry, simply enjoying each other, and this silence, broken only by their breathing and the crackling of the fireplace. It seemed that they could stay like this forever, dissolving in this moment. When the kiss ended, Mark remained seated next to her, his arm around her shoulders and letting her settle into his arms. They stared at the fire in silence, feeling incredibly calm and protected. "So you don't mind spending the night here after all?" Mark whispered, smiling slightly and holding her a little tighter. "I definitely don't mind now," Leah replied, smiling, closing her eyes, and settling comfortably into his shoulder. The night slowly turned into morning. They fell asleep, cuddled together, under the warm light of the dying fire. For the first time in a long time, Leah felt like her life had suddenly acquired a meaning and direction that she had never dreamed of when she got into the car and drove into that snowstorm. When she woke up in the morning, looking out the window, she saw that the snowfall had stopped, leaving the world around her quiet and clear. But now she knew that her life would never be the same again. She was with a man with whom she could be who she really was. Mark, still dozing next to her, pulled her close, and she closed her eyes with a smile, deciding that she would not rush back to her old life.